Assalamu alaikum. Today we are continuing with Surah al-Baqarah on our new verses 62 onwards. So the context we had in the previous section, verse 40, I think, addressing the children of Israel. And we talked about how basically God presents a case study of people whom He gave the guidance to, but it did not necessitate them following the guidance. And just them having the guidance as an item in their community does not make them like guided necessarily. You have to subject themselves to the guidance rather than just view that having the guidance is enough. Now we're continuing with 62. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والنصارى والصابئين. Yeah, sorry about that. Just forgot my mic. Verse 62. إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والنصارى والصابئين من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وعمل صالحا فلهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Okay, so indeed those who believed and those who were Jews and the Christians and the Sabians, whoever believed in God and the last day and worked righteousness, then for them is the reward with their Lord, and no fear upon them, and not do they grieve. So as usual, we'll take a second to reflect and then we'll discuss. Okay. So this is a verse that repeats a few times in some different form in various surahs. In this surah, you can see that it exactly fits with the theme and what we've been discussing. And it's a very important verse, like extremely so. It defines, here there's a few notes that are interesting. It defines a few communities
who possessed guidance, shall we say, and then says that whoever of them believed in God in the last day and worked righteousness, they will have the reward with their Lord, and there will be no fear upon them, and they will not grieve. So who are the communities? First of all, those who believed. And this is not a point about their belief. It's identifying a particular community here, which is the ones who believed in the Prophet. Because later it says, whoever of them believed in God. So if it's talking about the quality of having believed in general, then that would be completely redundant and strange, because then others could if it was talking about the quality of belief, of having believed, then it would be like those who believed, whoever of them believed in God. But that's not the point here. It's identifying those who believed in this message, hence those who followed the Prophet, those who believed in the Prophet, if you will, and then other communities. So it's identifying this present community, the Jewish community, the Christian community, and the Sabian community. Whoever from those communities believed in God in the last day and worked righteousness, they will have the reward with their Lord, and there's no fear upon them, nor will they grieve. This is just the basic of what the verse is literally saying. So the idea here is very important. It's defining salvation, basically. Obviously, no fear upon them, and they will not grieve. We've had this defined earlier in the surah in terms of following guidance, if you guys remember. But it's defining salvation, and it's very clear that the salvation is not based on which community you are from. The salvation is based upon, in this case, if you believe in God and the last day. So people from various communities could believe in God and the last day, obviously believe in God alone and the last day, and work righteousness. And that is the qualification for salvation. And no community has a monopoly upon salvation, because if a community has a monopoly upon salvation, then they have basically the guidance is under them rather than the alternative. Basically, salvation is dependent upon being part of that community. But salvation is not dependent upon being part of a community, it's dependent upon belief and righteous work. And this is, like I said, parallel to following God's guidance. Earlier, we have the same phrase, and it's going to come up again. When Adam is told to descend, if there comes to you from me guidance, then whoever follows my guidance, there is no fear upon them, and they do not grieve. So this verse defines salvation in terms of following God's guidance. Well, that's actually makes an easy logical equivalence then. Belief in God and the last day and working righteousness is therefore equivalent to following God's guidance, or at least parallel to it, because it results in the same thing, which is salvation. So you have, if you follow God's guidance, you'll have no fear upon you and you won't grieve. If you believe in God in the last day and work righteousness, you'll have no fear upon you and you'll not grieve. You'll have salvation if you follow God's guidance. You'll have salvation if you believe in God in the last day and work righteousness. Notice that all of these communities, what do they have in common, the ones that are mentioned? They're all ones who received guidance. The previous verse said, if there comes to you from me guidance, whoever follows my guidance, there's no fear upon him, and he will not grieve. So they all received guidance, and they all had the chance to follow it, which would constitute belief in God and the last day and working righteousness. So it's perfectly logically bulletproof and consistent, and the standard is perfectly consistent and applies the same in any context. If there comes guidance and you follow it, you'll have salvation. If you believe in the last day and work righteousness, you'll have salvation. And these communities, each that are mentioned, are ones who received guidance, so the people had an opportunity to believe in God in the last day and work righteousness. By the way, the StreamYard link is in the chat. Peace, Sister Meow.
Salam again, brother. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this verse is about those, like, unrelated to the fact of faith, unrelated to the fact of belief. Whoever from that community believed, like, basically the fact of being or belonging, being born in or belonging to one or another community, just like it was with Iblis and other angels, does not mean that one is to believe that one is a believer and that they do righteous deeds or work righteousness. So from those communities, from among those communities, whoever, if you're saying that those communities did receive guidance, then wouldn't it be redundant? So whoever received guidance and then followed it and acted upon it, is that what you're saying?
What's the question?
The question is, you're saying that those communities did receive guidance, and okay, whoever believed, those who were guided, those who helped, who converted, whatever, they believed in God and the last day and worked righteousness. So being in a community or belonging to a community does not, even if they receive guidance, so there is the individual responsibility following it, like believing and acting upon it.
Exactly, and that's the determination of salvation, is following it or believing and acting upon. It's not, and crucially, it's not dependent upon which community you're from. Because if it's dependent upon which community you're from, then the guidance is subjected under a community.
That verse coming after the mention of the Jews, basically it says that only those among them who believed and worked righteousness, who took the guidance and worked and acted upon it, followed the guidance and acted upon it, only them does it concern. So whether it's like about the whole Jewish community or whether it is about the believers among them. the righteous believers among them.
And just as a slight side note, and for clarity, it does not. The verse is not, I think, arguing because that somebody from the Jewish community, let's say, can reject the Quran and still, when it comes to him, and still be someone who believes in God on the last day and works righteousness. Those are a bit mutually exclusive, I find, because the surah talks about how, why did you kill the prophets if you were believers? Do you believe in part of the book and deny part of it? What is the reward of one who does that except disgrace in the closer, and on the day of judgment they will be returned to the strongest punishment? So, and we talked about how denial of the message constitutes denial of its totality. Therefore, denial definitely takes somebody out of belief. Denial of the book, denial of a messenger, etc. Wa alaikum salam, welcome brothers and sisters. And furthermore, people who are genuine believers have no reason to deny a message that they already believe in.
But then there are other verses that let them continue practicing and judging by their books, aren't there? And then can we take it as they can stay within their community and practice their rites and rituals, but um, that's that element of denial or rejection of the Quran, or you know, belying the Quran, and as a fact, as a revelation, that takes them out of faith? Or do they have to practice whatever the Quran says because there are actual amendments um, to the protocol?
It's maybe a bit nuanced between that. It's explicit denial definitely makes them deniers. Ignorance of might justify someone. Like,
Like negative predispositions about Islam or Quran, Islam in general or Quran. So maybe they've never actually read it because they had been negatively exposed before. That kind of ignorance. Is that what you're talking about?
something like that, yeah. But it's a bit of a slippery slope because the or a gray area, because the margin between that and belying God's signs is small. But I believe
Yeah, I
that
feel
gray area exists because God is not he's aware of everyone and he's going to put everyone in the right place, so to speak. He's not going to punish people on a technicality. He's going to punish them on account of what they really deserve.
Well, I agree with you, especially since Islam can be broadly defined as submission to God, not necessarily as a certain religion. And even nowadays, Muslims, they say it's a way of life rather than a religion.
Brother Mehdi brings up a funny point. He says, verse 61 is the salad list. They basically ask for a salad. Any other thoughts?
It's probably to support that viewpoint. One could add the verses where people of the book, when being exposed to the Quran, they fall prostrate and say that they had been Muslims before. So when they recognize the message, when they recognize um, God's, God's pattern, God's sunnah in the Quran, and that what they believed in, the God that they believed in, is the one who only could send a message like this, and then that is further to support whether they are even despite being in one or another community, um, there are various degrees of acceptance of God's revelations.
Also, a slight tangent or side note, but the way that it addresses the Jews, or like names them, الَّذِينَ هَادُوا in this case, a bit different than like Yahudi, though of the same apparent root, I guess. But those who guided is a possible literal rendering, which at least to me indicates like they have a role, which I think some of their own information corroborates, but they have a role to guide others. God did not just give them the guidance in isolation for them to hold on to it and conceal it and hold it for themselves about monotheism and such. Rather, they were supposed to spread it to others, which they seem to have genuinely done in some contexts, to their surroundings. There was a heavy exposure of the Greek-speaking world prior to Christianity to monotheism through contact with the Jews. So they actually had this role, both historically and scripturally, I believe. Yeah, light onto the nations, says Brother Mahdi. Continuing on a bit, وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ وَرَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ خُذْ مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ ثُمَّ تَوَّلَيْتُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ فَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَكُنْتُمْ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. ولقد علمتم الذين اعتدوا منكم في السبت فقلنا لهم كونوا قردة خاسئين فجعلناها نكالا لما بين يديها وما خلفها وموعظة للمتقين. And when we took your covenant and elevated above you the mount, take what we have given you in strength, and remember what is in it, that you may beware. Furthermore, you turned away from after that, so if not for the favor of God upon you and His mercy, surely you would have been of the losers. And surely already you knew those who transgressed of you in the Sabbath, so we said to them, be monkeys despised. So we made it a deterrent for what was between its hands and what was behind it, and an admonition for the wary. So, God mentions in verse 63 when he took their covenant at the mount, where Musa obviously received the tablets, and after they had worshipped the calf, God apparently took their covenant. And this is like the real case of when God took their covenant, and it's an event that they still remember. And it's extremely significant for Jews, I would say. And this is when God made the covenant between them, and he says, take what we have given you in strength and remember what is in it, that you may beware. And then emphasizes how they still turned away after that. If not for his mercy, they would have been lost. And then discusses their transgression of the Sabbath, which is represents breaking the covenant itself, and how God punished it. So the interesting thing about this one, which I found out by God's permission, was this raising of the mount. The Quran just kind of mentions it in passing. Does not even explain just God raised the mount over them. Actually, in one case, he does explain a bit more, where he says, when we raised the mount over you as if it was a cloud and you thought it would fall upon you, basically. And then he took their covenant. So yeah, the mountain appears to literally have been raised over them when they took their covenant. And this narrative seems to be, on first glance, unique to the Quran, in that if you read through the modern Torah, you won't find it there. But apparently this is a well-known narrative outside of, even though it's not in the modern Torah, so to speak. But the lift, just from a quick search, I'll put it on the screen. The concept of lifting Mount Sinai over the Israelites is heavily discussed in classic Jewish rabbinic literature. Its prominent narrative in the Babylonian Talmud and various midrashic texts. Basically, in the rabbinic text, they discuss that the context is if they accept the Torah, it will be good for them. If they do not, that they might as well make their graves. And the Quran says, hold firmly to what we have given you and remember what was in it, or take what we gave you in strength. So in the Jewish text, just a little bit more context, it says it focuses on coercion. They argue whether they took the covenant under force. But the Quranic narrative focuses on accountability. It serves as a reminder of how heavily the covenant weighs. And it's pretty interesting because it's literally the mountain over them. And the mountain's not just random. It's not just a random heavy object. The mountain is where God sent down the tablets, presumably. The same mountain, because why would the context have changed? So what's weighing over them is God's revelation, which is binding them as a covenant. And that God spoke to them and chose them, or however you want to put it. This is like a mountain over them. And notice, it focuses on take what we have given you in strength and remember what is in it that you may beware. So there's a connection between three objects. What we've given you, the revelation, the covenant, and the mountain. And they all come together.
The gravity of it, and then take it with strength, or perhaps hold, grasp strongly, take it with strength. And remember, so the gravity of the message, the binding of the covenant, of the contract. You just had it in the screenshot that was it really under duress, or were they willing to do it? Because I can't read it in the verse.
Yes, and as it says with the Quran, it's not so much about the duress or not, it's more so about the accountability, meaning there's an automatic weight to what God has given them. So they bear those stakes by default. So you can call it duress or not, but it is what it is. And it cannot be called unjust in any way because, like, God saved them anyway from their entire nation. So they should already owe their nation entirely to God, besides, like, the fact that He created them and all this. But He literally saved them from destruction, saved them from Pharaoh, saved them from when they worship the calf. Even after they forget this covenant, He still has mercy upon them. So each time it reinforces that their loyalty should belong entirely to God by default.
This comes in continuation as addressing to the Bani Israel, and verse 62 thus only came as an interjection. Where was that previous address? When you said, and when, so remember. Right, so 61 with 62 basically says, despite you being from the Jewish community, from the guided community, whoever turned away or whoever did not follow through, that does not apply to them. And remember how binding that contract was and the gravity of the message, and you turned away anyway. Sorry. And then the other thing is the favor of God upon you. So they are indeed favored, but His mercy is for everyone. It doesn't say mercy upon them, just mercy, like God's mercy in general. But it does say favor upon them.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is like they continue to, they receive the Torah. That's pretty much the context. They receive the book. They receive the tablets. And that same mountain of revelation is elevated over them. Hence, that is what this great weight is in, the revelation and the guidance, which necessitates them to follow it and to uphold the covenant, which itself is just following the guidance, which itself is worshiping God alone in all aspects, if you will, that you may beware. It again connects wariness. Like we had already connected guidance and wariness, but now you have a connection between remembering what is in it and wariness, which is parallel. The amount of parallels is quite mind-boggling, honestly. So now they turn away, like generationally, even in the same generation, but generation after generation, because this was not a covenant between one generation, it was a covenant between one nation. So the covenant encompasses those who, like their children and their children's children, etc. Meaning it covers Bani Israel for all time. So they turned away within that same generation when they refused to enter the Holy Land, and God could have done away with them permanently then, but He still had mercy upon them despite that they had to wander the desert for years. Then they turn away generationally, time after time, and God each time gives them a way back, per se, and the way back is also connected arguably to the Torah and the revelation that continued to be with them and the prophets that continued to be sent to them, preaching the same revelation, which is the Torah. So like the guidance continued to be among them. That is kind of the vehicle, I would say, through which God's mercy and favor continued to be among them despite their failures. They always had access to the guidance in some form or another.
Or shall we rather say the obligation? Because guidance being among them, like in terms of like revelation, the book. But if they don't follow, how can they guide others? So the obligation is still upon them anyway.
So you said the obligation connecting to what?
Yeah, you said guidance being among them, regardless, by virtue of them belonging to the nation of the covenant. But what is the covenant here? Guidance to follow the guidance. So guidance, like, or the covenant is their obligation to guide and to like their obligation to guide others. But how can they guide others if they don't do it to themselves? And there was a verse about it earlier. If they don't follow, how can they guide others? So is the guidance really still among them, or is it the obligation only?
I'm not quite sure if this is what you're getting at, but it's like of course, number one, they have to follow the guidance in order to also guide others. But their primary obligation is to follow, hence to worship God alone. But I just made a quick search of what was the covenant made at the Mount. A binding solemn agreement where humanity, specifically Israel, promised total obedience to divine law in exchange for God's protection, guidance, and favor. While all sources agree on the terrifying majesty of the event, they emphasize different facets of what the covenant actually entailed. According to the Hebrew Bible, Exodus, and Deuteronomy, the covenant is a legal and spiritual contract resembling ancient Near Eastern treaties. Israel must follow the Ten Commandments. If they obey, Israel will become God's treasured possession, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Anyway, according to rabbinic literature, acceptance of the Torah the covenant represents as cosmic necessity, which basically occurred under duress. The Midrash states that if Israel had refused the Torah, God would have dissolved the universe back into chaos. A bit overstated maybe, but basically they somewhat agree on following the Torah being the nature of the covenant. And if it's following the Torah, it's following the message or the guidance. And the primary summary would be worshiping God alone.
There's nothing about guiding others. This is how they appropriate it, or at least it's not mentioned in their sources. But here in the Quran, they are literally addressed as Ladina Hadu.
Yes, and this is actually mentioned somewhere in the Quran, is it not? Where it says like, وَإِذَا أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ لَتُبَيِّنَّنَهُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَكْتُمُونَهُ.
This was what I mentioned. There was a few verses before.
Oh, but it's another verse as well, I think. Oops. You will, the one I'm thinking of is 3:187 that says this really explicitly. And when we took your covenant, same word actually that we're looking at right now, of those, and when we took the covenant of those who were given the book, you shall clarify it to the people and not conceal it. But they threw it behind their backs and sold it for a small price, so wretched is what they purchase. So yes, part of their covenant explicitly, clearly was also to not conceal it, to clarify it to the people, and them refusing just that fact is them also throwing the book behind their back.
I could argue that that is excluding others from the salvation, with their own hands and taking the will of the benefit, that they're a superior nation and others are unable to attain salvation. It's just not for them because the knowledge was given to the Jews, but they are the ones who won't spread it, who won't clarify and preach it. So upholding the Torah, themselves, holding it on their backs, that the donkey with the books verse, but um, letting others break the laws of Torah as if they're not supposed to uphold them, and thus denying them of salvation.
Yes, and also it's interesting because it's like a miscalculation. It's as if they're thinking that, yes, we'll achieve salvation we'll like exclusivize salvation to ourselves by holding the knowledge for ourselves. But knowledge is not the quality that determines salvation. Belief in righteous work or following the guidance. Each time, like notice, like each time they're turning away from something that it should be impossible to come back from, like a fatal mistake. To break a covenant where the mountain was over you, where the stakes are like life and death, they still turn away and still God has mercy upon them. They worship the calf, which was also described as a fatal mistake, like they're told to kill themselves. Thus, even after that, God had mercy upon them. So they're saved from fatality like at least 3 times, literally with Pharaoh as well. As a nation, I mean.
I want to go back slightly because that's somewhat of a big conclusion that we arrived to. It basically refutes that those so-called Noahide laws, which are supposed to be for everyone, for all the people, which are like pre-Torah, and are the only ones that Jews, so to speak, impose on everyone, on non-Jewish people. So basically, those are like literally not enough because the clarification of the laws is after the Torah, not before it.
It's interesting because a lot of it comes from medieval Jewish literature, etc., where they discuss like how like medieval, it's actually way after the Quran, where they discuss how salvation works for non-Jews. At the time of the Quran, they had a very different view, which the Quran preserves, and history also preserves separately. But later they adopt this view in mainstream rabbinic sort of Judaism, where non-Jews can achieve salvation through following the Noahide laws. But there's a bit of debate within the Jewish circles whether they have to follow those laws knowing they're from the Torah or follow those laws in general. Some say like they have to know it's from the Torah or they don't get salvation. Some say just following it in general is enough. Then there's the whole mess of converting to Judaism in terms of like the lack of definition between becoming part of a nation or following a religion. Yeah, the classical Jewish schools, especially at the time of the Quran, did not actually apparently see salvation as possible for anyone who's non-Jewish. It's really interesting because the Quran preserves like an older set of beliefs which are no longer mainstream in some contexts. Now, with the breaking of the Sabbath is like one of the highest prohibitions, if not the main prohibition, arguably, for them. Breaking the Sabbath is like complete covenant rejection in one action. And obviously the Quran is extremely harsh against with regards to the Sabbath. I could even ask here. Ask, is breaking the Sabbath classically seen as a rejection of this covenant? Breaking the Sabbath is classically seen as a total rejection of the covenant in both Jewish and Islamic traditions. The Sabbath is seen as a physical sign and seal of the treaty itself. Violating it is equivalent to committing treason against God or denying creation. In Hebrew Bible and rabbinic literature, the Sabbath is explicitly designated as the ultimate eternal symbol of the agreement between God and Israel. Yeah. It states in Exodus 31:16, 17, they must keep the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. The Talmud, the sages rule that a Jew who publicly desecrates the Sabbath is legally treated the exact same as an idol worshiper or someone who renounces the entire Torah. In that case, there's a lot of idol worshippers nowadays amongst them. So obviously this one, the version in Surah 7 goes in a bit more detail with the story, but it involves the fish that come to them only on the Sabbath. They transgress by hunting or fishing on the Sabbath, because obviously the main thing with the Sabbath that all sources agree with is that the Sabbath, what's forbidden is to work upon the Sabbath. And also the root of the word means to rest, so everything lines up. The Sabbath is a prohibition of work. Of course, for anyone who's not aware, corresponding to Saturday, so to speak. Basically, that's all it takes to break the Sabbath, to work on Saturday.
But then the theological justification of it, or reasoning, that God rested on the seventh day is not mentioned anywhere in the Quran, but one could interpret it so there's an intercalary day given to mankind to rest.
Yes, I don't find it convincing with the whole God rested on the seventh day narrative. Number one, God doesn't rest, nor did it take any effort for him to create the heavens and the earth. Number two, even not even granting that, but what God does is not supposed to be emulated by humans anyway, necessarily. Therefore, on multiple counts, it just doesn't make any sense to me, nor does the Quran confirm it, as you said. The function of the day for me is twofold, maybe. Like, if we're analyzing deeper, it's like, number one, prohibition on work in the sense of they have to sit and do nothing, sort of, because God says it was only appointed upon those who differed on it, meaning it's somewhat of a consequence as well of their own differing. So it's a bit of a repentant sort of day of not working. Secondly, it's a bit of a holy day in some sense, where they, since they can't work, dedicate it to studying the Torah, and like it becomes a religious day. So it has both those aspects to it. But the main aspect, the most important, is the covenant.
Wait a minute. So those who differed about it, would that entail those who differed whether God rested on the seventh day or not? Well, basically, comes full circle. If it's incumbent on those who differed about it, and the the alleged theological justification is that God rested, and the Quran says that God does not overtake him sleep, nor does he rest, and that's the difference.
I think yes, that's one difference, but there, I think it's in generality, like those who differed on it, has many senses to, like those who refused to follow it, some of them, those who differed about like what's required on the Sabbath, all sorts of debates that like continue amongst Jews on what you can do or not do on the Sabbath, which continue even in the gospel narratives when Jesus is giving an example of like a donkey falling in a hole. Will you save it on the Sabbath? And then, so it's generally like a persistent source of differing amongst them. Yeah. But so, if the Sabbath represents their covenant, then also those who differed in it is sort of a sense of differed in their covenant. But either way, it's identifying, by using that phrase, it's pointing out they're like differing in regards to their covenant or the command or whatever. But it's still pointing out specifically them, the ones who took that covenant, which is the children of Israel. So the effect of the phrase is, it's only was appointed upon the children of Israel.
The following story of the cow and the way that Jews argued about it, about what was necessary and what wasn't. So that could be representative of how Sabbath is treated, and that is a test for them, not to get into those unnecessary details, just to follow the command without getting into the legal technicalities of it.
And also to Brother Mehdi's question, is it not more likely the Sabbath would have differed or would have been the same throughout time? I think more so the Sabbath was the same, and they're the ones who differed, per se. So when God mentions like we made a deterrent for who was before it and after it, and admonition for the wary, of course this is connecting back to the covenant. God is showing that if you do not uphold his covenant, you are apes, basically. So you could say, like, why apes of all things? Because the interesting thing about apes, even like historical people recognize that apes were the closest animal to humans. So it's our closest animal, so to speak, classically. So they're just, how to put it? Not upholding God's covenant, or you could say not believing in God, or not being able to follow God's guidance, or however you formulate it, makes one an animal, just a highly intelligent animal, because the animal similarly is unable to follow God's covenant. With us, it's worse because we actually have the ability to, and the animals just do what they're programmed. Yeah, he says so. Darwin wasn't wrong. He just got the order wrong. Some of them are just devolved humans. That's actually quite funny because this is like a case of devolution. Any other thoughts? Yeta says, so the human without the faculty to worship God is just another type of ape. Yeah, pretty much. A highly intelligent ape. Right. Animals in general, they're basically programmed in the sense that they follow instinctual neural pathways. They do not really contemplate morality. They do not contemplate meaning. They have triggers and responses, basically. And a human being who really just follows their desires really approaches that. They just have triggers and responses, just in a more intelligent way. It's another case of a fatal error. They transgressed on the Sabbath, which pretty much ended them, turned them into apes. Not just ended them, but made them a spectacle for generations. As it says, like, we made it a deterrent for what was before and after it, and an admonition for the wary. So breaking God's covenant is pretty deep if you think about it. Breaking God's covenant does not just cause your destruction, but God makes a sign out of you, like a spectacle out of you for breaking his covenant. Forever, arguably. Oh, that's an interesting question. Indeed, it's not. So the specific narrative of Sabbath breakers being turned into apes is not found anywhere in Jewish literature. While not in this specific context, in early Midrashic literature, people turning into apes as punishment for other types of rebellion against God does exist. I think it's more likely that it just was forgotten or not recorded per se over time, because a lot of their material is not from the 4 books of the Torah directly. It's from rabbinic recountings and such. They probably took it out for better PR, says Brother Matthew. And notice how it presents, though. And surely you already knew those who transgressed. So it's not recounting something they're unaware of. We can pretty much conclude that at the time of Revelation, they were aware of this. Assalamu alaikum. So, any final thoughts? Basically, it's not attested nowadays anywhere beyond the Quran. But like I said, the phrasing of the verse makes it clear that it was known to the Jewish audience. Any final thoughts? Okay, if not, we'll conclude. Inshallah, our next session will be after tomorrow, same time as usual. So peace to everybody. See you then. God willing. Assalamu alaikum.
Peace and thank you so much.